I'm not one for shortening people's names. I never really have been. Sometimes it just strikes me as over familiar. Obviously, I've got people who've known me for decades, and I've over the years become Dan to them. I'm not a big fan of Dan, but I'm not going to be petty and say, look, please don't call me Dan. They've shortened it over a period of years. It feels natural. It's right. I've got no problem with that. Until I was 24, I always went by Danny. And then I remember being in this job and just really learning at that stage of my life that Danny no longer worked, that to go in with the diminutive meant that I was treated as a kid. And obviously on my birth certificate, I'm Daniel, but no one had ever called me Daniel. And so at 24, I made that decision. I'm Daniel, moving forward with the Daniel. Still get the Dan occasionally. I get Danny. Family tend to call me Danny. I'm not someone as well who is given to calling people by nicknames. There have been times when I've met people and right away they're like, call me whatever, TJ. I'm not going to do that. If I've known you for 5 years, maybe if it feels right, I will. And some years ago, in one of the many 9 to 5 environments I've been in that I should never have been in. I remember I just started in this place and I was being set up with my account so I could access the database, and the IT guy came around. We introduced ourselves and said, my name's Daniel. He's entering my details and he said, so do you prefer to be called Daniel or Dan? I said, Daniel. He ended up setting up my account as Dan. And I looked at this guy and I said to him, we've got nowhere to go now. I could be here for 5 years, which I wasn't. It's unusual for me to be somewhere for 5 months. But I said to him, look, we've got nowhere to go now. You meet someone, you start off with a full name, the given name rather. You're Daniel. Maybe in a year or two you become Dan. I've got no problem with that. It feels natural. This guy right away, Dan. It did disappoint me. I've got a cousin who is a habitual name shortener. He could meet a Kevin and within 5 minutes, Kevin is Kev. I don't like that level of over familiarity. Dan, I can live with Dan. Danny, if someone's calling me Danny, I've got no problem with that. But to be taken seriously, I think you got to have an adult name, Daniel. I don't feel like a Daniel, but that's the name I use in work-related stuff. Before you shorten someone's name, think about it. Have a think. Does it feel right? Have you known them long enough? If you haven't, then I would reconsider.